Wir haben heute mit uns einen Vasudeva, was Herr Kuschel in seinem ganz aufschlussreichen Vortrag erwähnt hat, mit Vasudeva als Lao Tse. Wir haben so einen auch in Indien und der heißt Martin Kemschen. Heute hat meine Kollegin Frau Booth, sorry, I have to speak in English. So my colleague, Dr. Meher Booth, just mentioned, gave me the credit that I had the idea. Actually, it was Martin Kemshen's idea. He asked me a couple of months ago, why aren't you doing anything? Siddhartha is turning 100 this year. So it is his brainchild, what we are experiencing today. And I'm very, very happy to welcome this enlightened ferryman who has been making those bridges between India and Germany for the last more than 40 years. Martin Kemschen has his PhD in German literature as well as in comparative religion. He has 2 PhDs, and since 1980, he is associated with Shanti Niketan, where he has been primarily engaging himself with Tagore's text, translating Tagore's poetry, Tagore, the Indian Nobel laureate. His poetry, he has brought out a biography of Tagore in German. He has been a prolific writer where Tagore is concerned. And in fact, Martin Kemschen wears many hats. He has not only written on Tagore, but also on Gras and many Indian and Hesse, many Indian topics. He is also a creative writer. He has authored a novel and several short stories. Besides, he's a journalist. Last 20 years, he has been contributing to the frequently in the Statesman and the Telegraph. He has many feathers in his cap. As I said, he has received the Bundesverdienstkreuz, the Order of Merit from the German government, the Mark Tagore Prize, to name a few. And I think the latest is that he has come out with his autobiography recently. So we have a very eminent scholar here who I think is perhaps the most competent to speak on the topic, because he has both the sides in his grip, so to say, the Indian and the German side, and he will be speaking on Indian route. Please.
Say this because, thank you. I feel in Professor, now you can, because I feel in Professor is concerned, but in many, and Hesse has been a kind of constant topic this year because of Siddhartha. I was able to speak on the novel in Switzerland, in Germany, and also here in India in several places. And I'm extremely happy that the conclusion of now in Bombay and will be conducted by very renowned professors and Germanisten. And let me start. The Hermann Hesse novel Siddhartha, its roots in Indian philosophy.
Martin, would you like us to project your text, or is it okay that you just read?
Have you got the text with you?
I cannot hear you.
Have you received the text? Is it
Yeah,
Do you have
you
it
have
with
sent
you?
me a text. So would you like it to be presented, or I think we just hear listen to you. I think that's better. Okay. Please continue.
Had we, as adolescents and young adults, not read Hermann Hesse's novels, our education and worldview would not have been complete. Hesse was part of our life in Germany. He occupies a bit the space of a cultural and spiritual godfather, like Rabindranath Tagore does in India, especially in Bengal. In India, the German writer Hermann Hesse is best known as the author of his Indian novel Siddhartha. It is not, as the name may suggest, modeled on the Buddha's life. About this we have heard extensively in the keynote address. Siddhartha is a Brahmin youth who decides to embrace the life of a wandering monk. After finding no happiness in it, he returns to the world and becomes the lover of Kamala, a courtesan, and the business partner of Kamaswamy, an affluent businessman. Many years go by until Siddhartha realizes that erotic love and wealth ultimately provides no lasting happiness and peace. He reverts to the ascetic life, dwelling near the river as a boatman. Konrad Rooks filmed Siddhartha of 1972 with Shashi Kapoor in the lead role, was shown in large cinema halls all over India and made Hesse's novel known to a wider Indian public. The Indian landscapes emanate a genuinely Indian emotional atmosphere. In long and quiet shots, the film takes in the area around Rishikesh for Siddhartha's youth, a magnificent Rajasthani fort for the worldly episode with Kamala and Kamaswamy, and finally the Ganges further downstream with its plain and sparsely wooded terrain. The Indian public was able to find an entry into Hermann Hesse's mind through its own landscapes. Hence, the novel Siddhartha also attained a certain measure of fame in this country because many wanted to read the book after they had been moved by the film. In the 60s and 70s, Indian adolescents, I hear, picked up Siddhartha from the hippie young men and women who surged on to Indian shores from Europe and America. Many of them kept Siddhartha in the hip pockets like a life-saving medicine. But on the whole, it was never the cult book in India that it became in the West. Why should it? Does India not have her own share of inspirational literature? Why learn about Indian life via a German writer? In Siddhartha, Hesse quotes from the Upanishads. He writes a fictitious dialogue between Siddhartha and the Buddha, in which Siddhartha finally rejects the philosophy of Buddhism. Hesse is clearly inspired by the Kama Sutra in the chapters around Kamala, the courtesan, and Kamaswamy, the businessman. And finally, Hesse recreates the famous universal vision of the 11th chapter in the Bhagavad Gita and applies it to Siddhartha's own realization of freedom. Siddhartha finds his moksha while he sits at the river watching it flow by. The incessant, slow movement of the water draws him into himself and gives him that genuine detachment he has been longing for all his life. His soul is at peace now. By Hesse's own admission, Siddhartha is the outcome of the author's Protestant Christian upbringing as much as of the Indian sacred literature he had studied. He draws strongly from Indian sources, but Siddhartha's life journey does not quite resemble the typical holy career of a Hindu or Buddhist monk. Consider this. Hermann Hesse takes the youthful Siddhartha who leaves his parents, then he describes him as a typical wandering monk, and thereafter tells the story of how he, Siddhartha, renounces the monastic garb to live with Kambala. Hesse relates this as a positive step in Siddhartha's journey to spiritual fulfillment. This, however, goes against the ethos of Hinduism and Buddhism. A monk who returns to the world will be severely criticized by society in the past and today. His step will never be seen as spiritual advancement, but as a relapse. According to the Chatur Ashrama Dharma of ancient Hinduism, the young student first becomes a householder, then a hermit, and finally a monk. First the student, then householder, then hermit, then finally a monk. Hesse has reversed the order, and thus he ignores the spiritual logic in the progression of the 4 stages of life. The idea of those 4 stages is that human beings have certain innate desires which need to be fulfilled. They are the desire of learning, the first stage, for sexual pleasure, for a spouse, for children and wealth, second stage, and at the end for moksha, the third and fourth stage. The ancient Hindus teach that these desires must be fulfilled in that order. Only the person who is satiated with the enjoyments and duties of family life is capable of embarking on the monastic state. Buddhism and later-day Hinduism have suppressed the stage of family life altogether without making room for these experiences later. Hesse has shaped Siddhartha's life according to his own personal experience. He struggled through a number of crises. Thus, his spiritual progress has never been linear or logical. Likewise, his figure, Siddhartha, left one stage of life in favor of another, not because he had exhausted all the potentialities of the last stage, but because of a crisis which urged him on to another form of existence. We have heard this in detail by Professor Kushal in his keynote address. Let us look at the novel Siddhartha more closely. Hermann Hesse considers his visit to Sri Lanka and Indonesia in the year 1911 as rather inconsequential for his formation of his ideas on India. More important was his dedication into the reading of Hindu and Buddhist scripture from his earliest youth. Hesse explains his reason for this reading habit in a letter. I quote, "Since many years, I am convinced that Europe is declining spiritually and is in need of a return to its sources in Asia." Indeed, he who reads Siddhartha carefully cannot discover any direct link with Hesse's personal experiences in Asia, not even with Hesse's diaries and notes, which he published under the title From India, aus Asien. So we must rely entirely on Hindu and Buddhist philosophical scriptures and illuminate the background of Hesse's novel. Yet these books obviously do not flow into his work of fiction directly, although we do find, as mentioned, a few quotations from the Upanishads sprinkled into the text of the novel. On the contrary, as is to be expected of a work of fiction, Hesse's reading of his own experiences amalgamate so organically that the one can no longer be distinguished from the other. In the novel Siddhartha is a Brahmin. In the first chapter, Hesse describes the Brahmanic household as centering around the rituals of bathing and sacrifices. Dissatisfied with the narrowness of ritualism, he hopes for more freedom of the spirit in the life of a samana, a mendicant monk. After Siddhartha discovers that this life too is governed by rules and bad habits, he feels tempted to associate himself with the monastic group evolving around Gautama Buddha. Buddha is a historical figure who appears twice in the novel. He lived in the 6th and 5th centuries before Christ, which seems to place the entire piece of Hesse's fiction into that period, 6th and 5th century BC. This, however, was, I am sure, not the author's intention. On the contrary, Hesse wanted to dehistorize the figure of the Buddha. He strove to idealize it by conscientiously avoiding all allusions to historical, social, or political conditions of that time. Besides the Kama Sutra, a text dating back to the 3rd and 4th century AD, after Christ, whose influence on the novel Siddhartha is evident, could not have had any impact during the time of the historical Buddha. The rejection of the Buddha teaching in the beginning of Siddhartha's total turning away from asceticism, in an inspiring dialogue between Siddhartha and the Buddha, the former explains his rejection of the Buddha's teaching. Buddha sees life as a continuous, predetermined causal chain. The duty of a Buddhist follower is to escape the causality of his life by abnegating life itself. Siddhartha, in his dialogue, doubts that causal chains can be overcome. Redemption happens on the transcendental plane, whereas causality is a phenomenon on the experiential plane. Siddhartha sees a small gap in Buddha's teaching and rejects not only his teaching, but any system of teaching. I quote, "Nobody will partake in salvation through teaching," he announces categorically. After 3 different kinds of teaching, the Brahmanical ritual teaching, the Hindu ascetic teaching, and the Buddhist ascetic teaching, have all disappointed Siddhartha, he experiences it as a liberation when he moves into the so-called worldly life. To repeat what I said in the beginning, viewed from the Hindu philosophical background, such a move from the monastic state to the state of a householder is a relapse. Even more so since Siddhartha does not actually start a family by marrying and raising children. Instead, he becomes the lover of a courtesan, Kamala, whom he never marries. Their son was born only towards the end of the relationship and was, until her death, raised by Kamala alone. In the Chatur Ashrama Dharma, the stage of the householder is seen as a transition period from studentship to the hermetical and monastic life. The householder stage is meant to serve the continuation of the family through offspring and the continuation of family rituals. It is the fulfillment of a social obligation. In Hesse's novel, however, the life of the senses experienced it as a positive value in itself, does not serve any ulterior purpose. Let us look at the householder stage more closely. It is, I believe, after his study of the Kama Sutra that Hermann Hesse conceived of this stage of Siddhartha's development. For him, as a European Protestant Christian, it is certainly unusual that he should allow Siddhartha to find fulfillment in the arms of a courtesan for 20 years, without entering marriage and without wanting children. The Kama Sutra teaches lovemaking as a purely technical art, taking neither the social status of the lovers nor any moral considerations into its purview. To the Kama Sutra, it is quite irrelevant whether the lovers are married or not. Instead, it focuses on the ways and means to make the love act as fulfilling as possible. Hence, I surmise, Hesse felt inspired to place his fictional figure Siddhartha into a similarly abstracted, idealized environment, overlooking the specific social net within which a man and a woman normally celebrate their union. In 3 steps, Siddhartha moves swiftly from the state of a monk to the state of a lover. In a dream, his monastic companion Govinda transforms himself into a woman. Naturally, Siddhartha wonders whether his next companion would be a woman. Soon thereafter, he meets a young woman washing clothes at a river. They converse and become attracted to each other. The young woman approaches the monk, putting her left foot on his right, as if wanting to climb up on him. Within the categories of the Kama Sutra, this is one of the 8 methods of man and woman approaching each other with the intention of intercourse. It is called the gesture of tree climbing. Within the Indian context, this scene of a young female stranger approaching an unknown monk with this explicit gesture involving physical contact is utterly unrealistic. In fact, it appears contrived. Hesse can only have meant it as a symbol. The stern strictness of monastic discipline can be broken only by a woman who takes the initiative to approach a man. The 3rd stage of this transition from the monastic to the worldly life is the meeting of Kamala. Siddhartha, after seeing her, walks up to her and begs her to impart him, I quote, that art which you have mastered in the highest degree. It is obvious that he asks to be taught by Kamala and through the Kama Sutra. Siddhartha proceeds to learn love as an art. Siddhartha and Kamala do not seek passionate involvement, no emotional clinging to each other. Rather, they achieve a distant love relationship. Sutra teaches maths and technique such a distant, unemotional relationship. A mutual emotional attraction cannot be brought about through any teachings. The Kama Sutra simply teaches the teachable and learnable. In the course of time, Siddhartha loses, however, this equanimous distance to the worldly life. He becomes attached and anxious in his dealings with Kamaswami, this business partner, and he slips into the confusions and conflicts which result from greed and lust. Only after that happens, Siddhartha no longer sees his present life as a progress compared to his former ascetic life, but a regress, and he resolves to change the path of his life once again. He leaves Kamala and leaves Kamaswami and begins walking like a mendicant monk once again. Finally, he settles at the bank of a river, staying in a hut with an old boatman. According to Hindu Dharma, this way of life now resembles the third stage of life, the life of a forest hermit. This could have been the conclusion of Siddhartha's spiritual career and the end of Siddhartha the novel. Yet, Hermann Hesse decides to add one more chapter. Suddenly, Kamala arrives at Siddhartha's river retreat to reveal the existence of their son to the former lover. She had conceived him towards the end of their liaison. A snake bite causes Kamala to expire, leaving their son in Siddhartha's care. Once again, Siddhartha becomes a kind of a householder. Formerly, he was a lover, now he is a parent. It is only after the disgruntled son decides to live in the city that Siddhartha can quietly celebrate his final liberation and remain at peace dwelling near the river. Hermann Hesse wrote his novel Siddhartha 10 years after his visit to Sri Lanka and Indonesia. Within that decade, one epochal book was published which influenced Hermann Hesse deeply. This was the translation of Gautama Buddha's sermons, translated into German by Karl Eugen Neumann in 3 volumes and published in December 1918. Hesse owned the second edition of 1921, which he reviewed twice at great length. Hesse read these sermons while working on his novel Siddhartha. Hesse praised the quiet, endlessly flowing reflections of Neumann's language, which emanates a deeply spiritual atmosphere. Hesse emphasized the, I quote, genuine Indian melody in German language, in Neumann's translation. It is exactly that genuine Indian melody which Hermann Hesse tried to conjure in Siddhartha, the novel, as well. Like Neumann, he hoped to create a meditative thinking which could not stop at a cognitive realization as in Western thought, but lead to a, I quote, transformation of consciousness, which results in a pure harmony and a fusion of logical and intuitive thinking. In Siddhartha, the river is a powerful symbol of the higher level of existence. Seen from a Western perspective, the ever-flowing river is regarded as a symbol of pure temporariness, of the flux of time, and this is certainly situated on the lower level of existence. But viewed from an Indian perspective, the river immediately brings to mind the Upanishadic terms of the crossing of the river and of the other shore. Crossing the river is an epithet of the traversing of one's lifespan until the other shore, namely death and liberation, is revealed. Here, the river, or rather the other shore of the river, must certainly be understood as a symbol of the yearning for the higher level of existence. In his evocation of the river, Hesse has created a rather more artistic than philosophical figure of speech, mingling Indian and Western symbolic values. For Siddhartha, the river takes various shades of meaning at different stages in his life. The river is, however, at all times a positive, supportive symbol. Even when Siddhartha wishes to throw himself into its waters in an attempt to commit suicide, the river is a symbol of liberation from an unbearable existence. At the end, Siddhartha finds an ultimate, unshakable peace by contemplating the constant, quiet flow of the waters, which take on the resonances of eternity. Indian philosophy and Indian existential consciousness are impregnated with this two-level existence and the thinking and feeling on two levels. It informs everyday Indian life in a persuasive way. Throughout Siddhartha, we see the effort to transcend the lower level of existence and aim at the higher level. It is this deep yearning for the higher life which gives Siddhartha its peculiarly genuine Indian melody. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Martin. It has been a very, very well interwoven text. I mean, you have spoken about the intermingling of the Protestant, Christian, Hindu, and Buddhist thought in Siddhartha, and how he wrote this text after 10 years of his experience in Sri Lanka and Indonesia. What comes out very significantly is this freedom of spirit, this journey to find fulfillment, and this yearning for the higher realm, which you call as perhaps the genuine Indian melody. And I think particularly very, very dominant was also the metaphor of the river that you referred to. And I'm sure there would be questions or comments. Are there any? It was a very well-rounded.
Vibha, may I ask a question?
Yeah, Jyoti, sure.
Just let me. Yeah, thanks very much, Dr. Kemshin, for your wonderful presentation. And you are talking about the intermingling of Christian, Buddhist, and Hindu thought in this work. And at the same time, you start off by saying that it's a kind of a going away from the pure Buddhist and Hindu notions of nirvana or of the Vedanta. Now, I just have one query. Within the Hindu thought, are you just referring to Brahmanical Hinduism? Because if you go later on, you go further towards, the middle 14th century, 15th century, developments within what we call the cultural religious practices of the subcontinent, there is a very strong bhakti movement, which steers away from Brahmanical Hinduism and appropriates God, or the idea of God and the individual outside the structure of the caste system and the rituals of the temple. What I'm trying to say is, in this movement, the whole idea of attaining the higher level of existence or striving can be attained while being within the world, or what we say, you don't have to become a samana, you don't have to renounce. Renunciation is negated, whereas leading a life of a person who works, earns the livelihood, but at the same time is in sync with the higher being, God, Paramatma, is also part of Hinduism. So I'd just like a clarification whether you are taking this in account when you say that there is, there is a going away from Hinduism in Siddhartha, in your reading of this aspect. That's my query.
Yeah, thank you. As we were told by the key speaker, that the emotional love for God, bhakti, has not been discussed or has not been presented in the novel Siddhartha, except at the end when Liebe, when love is being mentioned as the ultimate goal in Siddhartha's life. That is the only page where we can hear the word love, which is equivalent to bhakti in a certain way. And the rest, again, as the key note speaker is mentioning, the part or the kind of Hinduism that is being shown is Vedanta. And I have specially focused on the Chatur Ashrama system, which has been followed and as well as consciously not followed in Hermann Hesse's book. I am quite sure that Hesse may not have known this 4 stages of life according to Hinduism. There's no sign of him having known it, but obviously the progression in Siddhartha's life reflects this notion of Hinduism. So I believe, I'm convinced that bhakti in itself, that part of Hinduism, has not played a role in this novel.
All right. Thank you.
You're not happy with that?
No, no, I'm not. I was actually referring to the scholarship on Siddhartha, where very often in Western research, the notion of Hinduism is very much in sync with of European Indology, or let's say German Indology, which locates everything in ancient India and ancient Hinduism, whereas Hesse himself may not have referred to bhakti, but the scholars on Siddhartha, or the scholarship, the way there is a negation that it is not Hinduism, there I have a bit of a problem, because this Hinduism would mean a very, very a Hinduism, Brahmanical Hinduism, as perceived or celebrated in Indology. Whereas Hinduism develops, it is a living way of life which continues to develop and like all religions, like all practices. That was my point. Not that Hesse is not aware of it, but the scholarship on Hesse, when it is said that it is not Hinduism, I have a bit of a, I feel there should be a little bit of a nuanced approach to it. That's all I was, nothing. Thanks very much for the wonderful paper, though.